I'd never thought I'd find myself in a situation that felt like it belonged in a horror movie. You know, the kind of story you laugh off when a friend tells it. Sounds like something from a scary film, but that night on that trail deep in the woods, I lived it. I was hiking alone, something I did often enough to feel comfortable with. I liked the silence, the chance to be away from people, the way nature demanded focus and respect. This trip was supposed to be no different. I picked a trail I hadn't been on before, a remote one that promised a good workout and some spectacular views. The day was clear and warm when I started. The forest was dense with pine and fir trees, the sun flickering through the needles, casting patches of light on the forest floor. The path was narrow and winding, lined with rocks and roots that made the footing tricky. I moved carefully but steadily, my backpack snug against my shoulders, boots gripping the dirt and stones. Birds called overhead, and the occasional rustle of small animals moving in the brush broke the silence. I liked the sound of it all, peaceful and natural. I had planned to hike in, camp near a small creek, then head back the next day. My gear was light but adequate. A tent, sleeping bag, water, some food, a flashlight, and a first aid kit. I didn't expect trouble. As the afternoon wore on, I noticed the trail becoming less well-maintained. Fallen branches blocked parts of the path, and the underbrush grew thicker. The sunlight dimmed as the trees closed in overhead. Still, I pushed forward. I wanted to reach the creek before dark. About 2 hours in, I came to a fork. One path led downhill toward the creek, the other climbed up a hill. The creek path looked overgrown but manageable, so I took it. As I walked, I started to feel uneasy. The forest seemed too quiet now. No birds, no insects buzzing, no wind through the leaves. It was as if the woods had gone completely still. I shook off the feeling. Sometimes that happens, I thought, just a quiet moment. I kept moving, eyes scanning the trail. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a noise behind me, a snapping twig, close and deliberate. I stopped and turned sharply, shining my flashlight into the darkening woods. Nothing. I felt my heart quicken. I told myself it was probably a deer or some other animal. I'd seen tracks along the trail earlier, nothing dangerous. But that feeling wouldn't go away. I picked up my pace. The sun was dipping low now, the sky turning orange and pink through the trees. The trail grew muddier as I neared the creek. Then I heard it again. Another crack of a branch, this time louder and closer. I spun around, shining the light, but the shadows swallowed everything. No movement, no shape, no eyes reflecting back. I told myself to stay calm, to keep moving. My footsteps sounded loud on the wet dirt. I kept looking behind me, half expecting to see someone following. I reached the creek, the water flowing gently over smooth stones. The spot was beautiful but isolated. I set up my tent quickly, eager to get inside before dark. While pitching the tent, I heard something else. A low rustling sound coming from the brush nearby. I froze. The sound was too deliberate to be the wind. I scanned the bushes with my flashlight beam, heart hammering. Suddenly, something moved fast, a dark shape darting between the trees. I caught a glimpse of it, large, quick, and silent. I couldn't tell what it was. Panic started to rise. I hurried to finish setting up my tent, moving as fast as I could without tripping. Inside, I zipped the tent closed and sat on my sleeping bag, breathing hard. Outside, the rustling continued. Branches cracked, footsteps, slow and heavy. I grabbed my flashlight and a small hunting knife I always carried in my pack. I told myself to think clearly. No one should be out here this late. The trailhead was miles away, and the nearest road was even farther. My phone had no signal. I was alone. The rustling grew louder, circling the tent. I turned on the flashlight and swept the beam around. Nothing but trees and shadows. I tried to calm down, but then I heard it. A low growl, deep and guttural, coming from just beyond the edge of the clearing. I froze. The growl was not animalistic in the way I was used to. It was too deep, too deliberate. My mind raced through the possibilities. Was it a wild animal? A bear? A mountain lion? But neither usually growled like that. and the weight of the footsteps around me told me it was something large. I remembered the stories I'd heard about hunters encountering aggressive animals or even poachers in these woods. I wished I had brought a flare or a whistle. Suddenly, the growl stopped. The forest fell silent again. I held my breath. Then, from the darkness, a large shape moved into the light of my flashlight. It was huge, bigger than any animal I'd seen. Tall on its hind legs, covered in thick, matted fur. Eyes glinting in the beam. It moved slowly, purposefully, circling me. I could hear its heavy breathing. My hands trembled. I gripped the knife tighter. Adrenaline surged through me, but I knew panic could be fatal. I backed slowly toward the tent's zipper, trying to keep the creature in sight. It made a low rumbling noise, like a growl mixed with a snarl. I realized I was in real danger. My mind flashed to horror movies, those dumb stories where the person in the woods gets trapped or stalked. Sounds like this is out of a horror movie, I thought bitterly, fighting the fear that threatened to paralyze me. The creature stopped circling and stared at me directly. Then, it turned and vanished into the trees as silently as it came. I didn't move for a long time after that, barely breathing, waiting for any sign it was still nearby. I knew I couldn't stay in the tent all night. Eventually, the night grew colder. The sounds of the forest resumed. Crickets, distant owls, the rushing creek. But I kept my flashlight on, watching the edge of the clearing. Dawn was slow to come. When it did, the first rays of sunlight warmed the tent and the forest. I peeked outside cautiously. The clearing was empty. No sign of the creature. I packed up quickly and started hiking back the way I came. The trail was different in the daylight. Less frightening, but still thick and hard to navigate. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that shape again. Hours later, I reached the trailhead and my car. I sat inside for a while, hands shaking, trying to process what had happened. I told myself it was probably a bear or some wild animal displaced from its territory. But the way it moved, the growl, the size, it didn't match anything I knew. I realized how close I'd come to a real disaster. I was lucky. I made a mistake going so deep and alone without more safety measures. After that experience, I started hiking with others or making sure I had communication devices and plans in place. The woods had always been a place of peace for me, but now I knew they could hide things that were dangerous and unpredictable. Nature isn't a horror movie set. It's real, and it can be brutal if you're not prepared. I never underestimated the wilderness again, and that night stayed with me, a reminder that sometimes reality is scarier than any movie. I've always been fascinated by the wilderness and Australia's outback, with its vast, rugged landscape and unique wildlife. Had been a dream to explore. When I finally booked a solo hiking trip through a remote part of Queensland, I felt excited but cautious. I'd heard all kinds of stories about the animals out there. Some terrifying, some fascinating, but I figured I was prepared. I had my gear, maps, enough water, and a healthy respect for the environment. The first day was incredible. The landscape was harsh but beautiful. Red dirt trails cut through thick scrub and eucalyptus trees. Birds I'd never seen before called from the branches, and the occasional kangaroo bounded off when I got too close. The sun was fierce during the day, but the nights cooled enough for me to sleep comfortably under the stars. On the second day, as I moved deeper into the bush, I noticed something unusual. The trees and bushes around me seemed covered with strange, fuzzy caterpillars. At first, I thought it was just a minor infestation. I remembered thinking to myself, TBF, if I know anything about Australia, caterpillar infestation is literally a 1 out of 10 on the scale of possible animals you could run into. It was almost a joke in my mind, a minor inconvenience compared to the real dangers I expected. But those caterpillars were everywhere. Thousands of them, crawling and hanging from branches on silk threads. Their fuzzy bodies looked harmless enough, but I had heard some species in Australia could cause serious irritation or worse if touched. I kept my distance, careful not to brush against the trees. As the afternoon wore on, the caterpillars seemed to increase in number. I found myself walking through a thick cloud of them, some landing on my clothes and gear. I brushed them off, feeling a slight itch where one had touched my arm. I reminded myself not to panic. It was probably nothing serious. Still, as I made camp near a small waterhole, I noticed that the caterpillars were not just on the plants. They had spread to the ground, covering rocks and dirt, crawling in thick layers that made the earth look alive. It was unsettling. I set up my tent carefully, trying not to disturb the strange creatures. The air smelled heavy with something sweet but unpleasant, almost like rotting fruit mixed with chemicals. I didn't like it. That night, as I lay in my sleeping bag, I heard faint rustling sounds around my tent. I shined my flashlight outside and saw movement. Thousands of caterpillars inching their way toward my campsite. The ground was crawling. I sat very still, watching in disbelief as the small creatures swarmed around the tent poles and even tried to find their way under the tent's edges. I realized that while caterpillars might be a minor threat compared to Australia's snakes, spiders, and other critters, an infestation like this could become dangerous, especially if I accidentally came into contact with the wrong species. The next morning, I woke to find my clothes and backpack covered with a thin layer of fuzzy caterpillars. My skin felt raw and irritated from where they had crawled over me during the night. I was exhausted but knew I needed to keep moving. As I packed up camp, I noticed more alarming signs. The infestation was spreading rapidly. Branches snapped under the weight of the caterpillars, and some trees looked like they were dying. The quiet buzz of insects was replaced by the eerie silence of a place overwhelmed. The trail ahead was now carpeted with thousands of caterpillars, making walking difficult. I had to be careful where I stepped. The ground wriggled beneath my boots. Every movement stirred up tiny clouds of insects. I felt the first real pang of fear. This was no longer just a nuisance, it was a full-on invasion of the landscape. I thought about how these small creatures, usually seen as harmless, could make a place so hostile. The sun was blazing, and I was sweating heavily. My skin was itchy and sore from constant contact with caterpillar hairs. I wore long sleeves and pants, but nothing stopped the tiny hairs from getting in. My eyes watered and nose itched. Still, I pushed forward. Then, about halfway through the day, I heard a low rustling nearby, different from the caterpillar movements. I froze. It was coming from the bushes to my right. Suddenly, a large shape burst out. A wild dog or dingo. Its eyes locked on me. It was lean and fast, teeth bared. I backed away slowly, not making sudden moves. The dingo growled, circling me, but didn't attack. I realized it was likely as wary as I was. After a tense moment, it disappeared into the bushes. My heart pounded. I wasn't just dealing with caterpillars anymore. By late afternoon, I reached a small rocky ridge that gave me a view of the valley below. The sight was stunning, but the valley floor looked like a moving carpet of brown and orange. As far as I could see, millions of caterpillars spreading out like a tide. It hit me then how quickly nature could change and overwhelm. That night, I camped higher up on the ridge, away from the infestation, but the wind carried the caterpillar smell and the creeping threat of the invasion. Sleep was restless. I kept waking to strange sensations: itching, crawling, the feeling of being watched. On the third day, I decided to leave the trail altogether and try to find a way back to civilization through a side path I'd marked on my map. The path was steep and rugged. I had to scramble over boulders and through thick undergrowth. The caterpillars seemed less dense here, but I could still feel their presence. Suddenly, I spotted a snake coiled near the rocks ahead, blending perfectly with the ground. It was a brown snake, the most venomous in Australia. I froze, heart pounding. The snake didn't move but watched me with cold, unblinking eyes. I backed away carefully, making sure to avoid startling it. My hands were shaking as I put more distance between us. The presence of the snake reminded me that this place was wild in every sense, filled with dangers beyond caterpillars. The hike back was slow and exhausting. My legs ached, my skin was raw and irritated, and I felt drained. Finally, after what felt like hours, I reached a dirt road. I spotted a truck driving by and flagged it down. When I got back to town, I learned that a rare outbreak of caterpillars had been devastating the region's forests, threatening wildlife and vegetation. People warned me that the outback's dangers weren't just the obvious ones like snakes and spiders, but sometimes came in the smallest, most unexpected forms. That experience changed me. It made me respect the unpredictability of nature, the fact that you never really know what you might face out there. I still hike, but now with more caution, more preparation, and a deeper awareness that even something as seemingly harmless as a caterpillar infestation can become a nightmare when you're alone in the wild. Nature is full of surprises. Some you can see coming, others you can't. And sometimes, it's the little things you never expected that scare you the most. I was 3 days into a 5-day backcountry hike when everything really started to go downhill. Up to that point, the trip had been challenging, but nothing too out of the ordinary. I was part of a small group, mostly friends and a few solo hikers we'd picked up at the trailhead who tagged along for safety in numbers. The plan was to make it to a waterfall on day 3, set up camp near it, and then continue on deeper into the wilderness before looping back to the trailhead by day 5. It was ambitious, but most of us were reasonably experienced, and we'd been planning it for a few months. The morning of day 3 started off well enough. We'd camped in a pine grove the night before, just off a ridgeline that gave us a beautiful view of the mountains to the east. It had been cold, damp, and buggy, exactly what you'd expect in that kind of terrain, but nothing dramatic. We made good time in the morning, pushing over a moderate ascent and down through a long series of switchbacks that wound through mossy boulders and stands of birch trees. The trail flattened out about mid-morning, and by lunchtime we could hear the low, constant roar of the waterfall in the distance. It sounded like an idling freight train that never moved. By early afternoon, we reached it. The waterfall wasn't enormous, not by national park standards anyway, but it was still impressive. Maybe 40 feet high with a heavy sheet of water spilling over a jagged rock face into a wide river below. There was mist hanging in the air and a kind of deep rumble that vibrated through the ground. The base of the falls was surrounded by clusters of smooth, flat rocks that jutted out into the river. A few were big enough for tents. My tent mate and I spotted one about 500 feet downstream that looked ideal. Isolated, flat, and raised several feet above the river level. We figured it would give us a great view and a bit of privacy from the rest of the group, who were mostly camping farther back on the forested bank. It took some effort to scramble over the slick, uneven terrain to reach that rock, but we managed. The surface was worn smooth by centuries of flowing water, and we had to dig into our packs to find rocks heavy enough to use as anchors for our tent corners. The wind coming off the falls was constant, not strong, just persistent, and everything had a thin layer of moisture on it, even though the sky was still mostly clear when we set up. We got the tent pitched and started boiling water for dinner as the light began to dim. Then the weather shifted. I should have seen it coming. The sky got darker fast, the kind of bruised gray that doesn't ease into a storm but drops you straight into it. The temperature dropped suddenly too, and within 20 minutes of finishing dinner, it was raining hard. Not the kind of gentle drizzle that makes you zip up your rain jacket and shrug, but a full downpour, fat, heavy drops hammering down like handfuls of gravel thrown from the sky. I remember sitting cross-legged in the tent, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sound of it all. At first it felt oddly peaceful. The sound of the rain on the nylon, the wind buffeting the sides, the roar of the falls. It all blended together like static. But then the wind changed. It started coming in bursts, heavy ones, and not just from one direction. It was swirling, rushing straight off the falls and slamming into the tent wall facing the river. That wall started bowing in hard, pushing a foot or more into the space inside. Then the rain began blowing sideways, forcing itself through the seam where the two zippers met at the front of the tent. Water started to drip, then run in rivulets down onto our gear. We used our jackets and some dry clothes to try to block the opening, but nothing really helped. Everything was slowly getting soaked, pads, packs, clothes, and the river was rising. It happened fast, faster than I expected. What had been a rock raised several feet above the water was soon just barely clear of the current. I peeked outside and saw the river creeping up the sides of the rock, lapping at the edges. The rain wasn't letting up, and we were starting to realize just how vulnerable our position was. I made the decision to move our packs to higher ground. I figured we had enough time to scramble across the rocks back toward the tree line and stash them somewhere dry before coming back to deal with the tent. I unzipped the flap and crawled out, cradling my pack in my arms like it was something fragile. The rock was slick and uneven. I had to move carefully, testing each step before shifting my weight. As I was placing my pack behind a boulder on higher ground, I heard a sudden, sharp flapping sound and turned around. My tent mate had stepped out too. I don't know if he was trying to help or just wanted to see how bad it was, but the second he let go of the tent flap, it caught the wind like a sail. The whole thing, tent, sleeping bags, pads, lifted and then flipped into the air, landing a few feet away on the slick rock before sliding right into the swollen river. It was gone in an instant, just like that. I stood there in shock, rain pelting my hood, watching the tent bob and twist in the current as it floated downstream. I could see the orange corner of one of our sleeping bags dangling out like a tongue. There was nothing we could do. The river was too fast to chase it, and too wide and violent to wade into safely. We ended up huddling under a tree back near the main camp for a while, trying to figure out our next move. Lucky for us, a few of the solo guys had room in their tents, and they were generous enough to let us cram in with them. I got squeezed into a 1.5-person ultralight shelter with a guy who slept like a corpse and didn't move all night. I didn't have a pad or a sleeping bag anymore, so I curled up in a damp ball on the cold floor, using my rain jacket as a pillow and my backup fleece as a blanket. It was a long, miserable night. Everything hurt the next morning. My back, my hips, my feet, all of it. I barely slept, but we had a schedule to keep, and the next leg of the trail wasn't optional. If we didn't make it to the next site by nightfall, we'd risk having to camp in the open, and no one wanted that. Before we left, we managed to climb down along the rocks at the base of the river and fish out what was left of our gear. It wasn't much. The tent was a total loss. Both of the aluminum poles were snapped in multiple places, and the fly had torn clean off. One of the sleeping bags was caught between two boulders and looked like a drowned raccoon, bloated, heavy, and leaking down feathers. Everything was soaked. Our pads were waterlogged and weighed twice what they should have. We had no choice but to pack up the wet gear and carry it. I ditched a few non-essentials: an old paperback, a spare mug, and, God help me, my beach towel. That thing had soaked up more water than anything else I had. It felt like dragging a dead animal, and if I hadn't cared about leave no trace, I would have launched it off a cliff without a second thought. That thing was a curse. The hike that day was brutal. The trail climbed steeply for several miles, winding through muddy switchbacks and across narrow ridgelines that looked out over mist-filled valleys. My boots squelched with every step. My pack felt like it weighed 100 pounds, every ounce of waterlogged gear pulling at my shoulders. We passed through several meadows and a small burn area where the ground was loose and ashy. My thighs were cramping by mid-morning, and I was rationing the few dry calories I had left. Trail mix and one energy bar that hadn't been soaked. By some miracle, we made it to the next site around midday. It was a grassy clearing nestled against a stand of pine trees, the sun finally breaking through the clouds for the first time in 2 days. Felt like a gift. One of the guys in our group, an older dude who'd been backpacking for years, had brought rope. He strung it between a few trees, and we all took turns hanging out our soaked gear. I laid out my socks, shirts, and the one fleece that had somehow stayed mostly dry. The sleeping bag was beyond saving, but the pads dried out a bit in the sun. I laid down in the grass for a while and just stared at the sky. It was the first time in nearly 24 hours I didn't feel like I was in some kind of emergency. The quiet was surreal. No rushing water, no flapping tent walls, no screaming wind, just the occasional rustle of trees and the hum of distant insects. The smell of wet pine and drying fabric mixed in the air. That night, I slept under a makeshift tarp shelter, my half-dried fleece zipped up to my neck, my pack tucked under my knees to keep from rolling downhill. I didn't sleep well, but I slept, and I kept thinking about everything I'd learned. Never camp on a rock in the middle of a river, no matter how raised it seems. Water rises fast when it rains in the mountains. Tie your tent down even if you think the rock will hold it. Always bring rope, it solves a dozen problems you can't anticipate. And most of all, the people you hike with matter more than you realize. One day, They might be the ones who make room in their tent for you when you've lost everything. That trip didn't turn out the way I expected, but I finished it. I hiked the last 2 days sore, tired, and carrying extra weight I didn't need. But I came out of those woods better prepared than I went in. I never forgot how close we came to losing more than just gear. That river didn't care about our plans, and neither did the storm. I've done a lot of hikes since then, but every time I see water running fast over rock, I remember that night and the tent vanishing into the current. And I never pack a full-size towel anymore. I've been looking forward to that hike for weeks. There was this long loop trail tucked away in the corner of a national forest, about 14 miles, not too crowded, with a few streams, some decent elevation gain, and plenty of pine and cedar. I'd been working long hours, barely stepping outside except to take the trash out, and I just needed space, quiet, somewhere that didn't smell like burnt coffee and printer toner. So, I blocked out my Saturday, packed my backpack the night before, and set the alarm for 4:30 a.m. By 6:15 a.m., I was parked at the trailhead. There were no other cars, which was perfect. It was just me, the trees, the sound of wind cutting through leaves. Cool air wrapped around me when I stepped out. I could already feel the tension in my back start to ease. I locked the car, double-checked the pack. Plenty of water, snacks, headlamp, a compact first aid kit, knife, even a space blanket, just in case. I had my phone, though I didn't expect to have service out there. The map was in my back pocket, paper and waterproof. I always carry a compass clipped to my shoulder strap. I've been hiking solo since I was in college. I'm not careless about it. The trail started easy, soft dirt under my boots, the morning sun casting long shadows through the trees. Birds darted through the branches above me, and the smell of pine needles soaked the air. I hit the first mile marker without really thinking about it. It was that kind of walk, the kind where you feel like you're dissolving into the woods a little bit, just becoming part of it. About 3 miles in, the trail dipped into a small valley. It had rained the week before, and some of the switchbacks were muddy, so I had to watch my footing. At the bottom of the slope, I came across a narrow stream, maybe 6 feet across. There was a crossing spot where rocks had been stacked up, and I paused there, crouching to splash some water on my face. Cold and clean. The kind of water you could probably drink straight, though I still had my bottles. That's when I heard the first sound. It wasn't loud, more like a twig snapping somewhere upstream. I didn't think much of it. Could have been anything, a raccoon, a deer, even a squirrel. I waited for a moment, glancing up toward the bank, but I didn't see anything. I kept walking. Another 2 miles and the trail got steeper. My legs burned a little, but it felt good, like I was working for the view that I knew would be waiting at the top. That overlook, according to the map, was the halfway point. Just past it, the trail would loop back down on a more gradual descent, eventually winding its way back to the trailhead. I stopped a couple of times to sip water and rest, but I made good time. When I reached the overlook, I took my pack off and sat down on a flat boulder. Below me, trees stretched out in every direction. Green and gold and dark brown, the forest rolling like waves all the way to the horizon. I ate a protein bar, chewed slowly, just watching the treetops shift with the wind. But even then, something felt off. It was subtle at first, a stillness. I kept looking around without really knowing why. It's not like I'd heard anything strange, but my ears were pricked, like some part of me had picked up on something the rest of me hadn't yet. I stood up, stretched, and scanned the woods below. Nothing, just trees. Still, I felt it. Something was different. I tried to brush it off, got my pack back on, and started down the far side of the trail. It was rockier here, loose gravel in some places. I had to go slower. About half an hour later, the trail ducked into thicker trees. The light got patchier. Shadows crisscrossed the dirt, making it harder to see the ground clearly. I focused on my footing. Then, maybe 100 yards ahead, I saw something in the middle of the trail. At first I thought it was a log, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't. It was a backpack, just sitting there, off-center like it had been dropped. A grayish-green pack, scuffed and weathered, with one strap twisted underneath. There was dirt on the top of it, like it had rolled once or twice before stopping. I stopped walking. There was no one else on the trail. I hadn't seen anyone all morning, and yet there was this pack. I called out, not with my voice, but in my head. Is someone here? Of course, I didn't get an answer. I stepped off the trail a little and waited. I watched the trees, listened. 10 minutes passed. Nothing moved. I thought about walking past it, but something pulled at me. I took a cautious step forward and crouched near the pack. I didn't touch it, just looked. It had been out there for at least a day, maybe more. The fabric was damp underneath. There was no sign of footprints nearby. I circled it slowly, eyes scanning the trail. Nothing. Against my better judgment, I opened the top flap. Inside, I saw a crushed granola bar, a lighter, and a single glove. No ID, no phone, no name tag or anything that could tell me who it belonged to. Just random gear. The side pocket held a cracked pair of sunglasses and a small trail guide, one of those printed foldouts they hand out at visitor centers. I stood up quickly. My stomach felt tight. Something had happened here. I marked the location on my map with a circle. I took a picture with my phone just in case, though I still had no service. I figured I'd report it when I got back. Maybe someone had dropped it and left, or maybe a ranger had forgotten it. But deep down, I didn't believe that. I kept walking. For the next mile or so, I couldn't shake the tension in my chest. Every bird call made me flinch. Every rustling leaf pulled my eyes to the side of the trail. I kept looking over my shoulder. The breeze picked up, and I had the odd sensation of being watched. More than once, I stopped and scanned the woods behind me. Then I found the second thing. It was a boot, off to the left side of the trail, maybe 15 feet into the brush. Just sitting there, upright, like someone had stepped out of it and walked away barefoot. It was mud-stained and tilted forward a little, like it had sunk into the ground. No animal tracks around it. No claw marks. No blood. Just the boot. I didn't touch that one. I didn't linger. The trail narrowed again. My pace quickened. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that there was probably a logical explanation for all of it. But deep down, I didn't believe that either. Around mile 10, I passed through a dense cluster of trees where the light barely touched the forest floor. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. No birds. No wind. Just the sound of my boots on the dirt. I felt like I was being funneled into something, pulled toward a center I couldn't see. Then I saw the drag marks. Long, uneven furrows in the dirt, leading from the trail into the woods. Whatever had made them had been heavy, too heavy to carry. The leaves were pushed aside in streaks, and some of the branches were snapped clean off. I froze. The tracks didn't look like ATV trails. There were no tire prints, no shoe prints either. Just two deep lines like something or someone had been pulled or dragged. The marks were fresh. You could see the moisture where the top layer of dirt had been disturbed. I backed away. Every part of me wanted to run, but I didn't. I just started walking again, faster this time. My pack bounced against my back. My breathing grew shallow. I glanced over my shoulder every few steps. At one point, I thought I heard movement in the trees behind me. A short, heavy sound, like a footstep on damp ground. I stopped, waited. Nothing. Then I heard it again. I started to run. Not a full sprint. I wasn't trying to fall and break an ankle, but fast enough that I could feel panic clawing its way up my spine. The trail twisted and dropped, and I followed it blindly, not even thinking anymore, just moving. Eventually, after what felt like an hour but was probably 15 minutes, the trees began to thin. I saw sunlight ahead and pushed toward it, heart pounding. When I finally reached the trailhead, my car was still there, alone. I got in, slammed the door, and locked it. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, shaking. I never reported the backpack, or the boot, or the drag marks. I told myself I would, but I didn't. Not because I forgot, because I couldn't explain it. What would I even say? I've never gone back to that trail. I looked it up a few months later. No missing persons reports filed around that area. No news, no clues. It was like none of it ever happened. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. Something happened out there, something bad, and I was lucky enough not to be a part of it. It started as just another backpacking trip in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California, one I'd been looking forward to for months. The plan was straightforward: a 3-day loop through some of the most beautiful, rugged terrain in the area. My group included 3 others, close friends from college, and we were all experienced hikers, used to carrying our own gear and watching out for the usual wilderness dangers. Getting lost, weather changes, rough trails. Bears were something we knew were out there, but we'd always been careful about food storage, and no one had ever had a problem before. We set out early in the morning, packing light but well enough for the rough trail ahead. The air was crisp and fresh, the pine scent thick around us as we followed the narrow dirt path up into the mountains. The trail climbed steadily, twisting around boulders and dense groves of fir trees, sometimes opening up to breathtaking views of distant peaks and valleys. We moved at a good pace, stopping only for short breaks to drink water and take pictures of the wildflowers and buzzing bees. The first day went smoothly. We made camp near a small creek at the base of a ridge, where the sound of running water filled the quiet night. We cooked our dinner over a small camp stove, cleaned up thoroughly, and followed all the bear safety rules we'd been drilled on. Everything scented, everything food-related, packed into the bear bags we'd brought for the trip. These bags were specially designed. Heavy-duty nylon sacks meant to hold food and anything with a smell that might attract wildlife. We used a sturdy rope and pulley system to hoist the bags high into the branches of a tall pine tree, at least 15 feet off the ground and well away from the trunk. The theory was simple. Bears could climb trees, but they couldn't reach the bags if they were hung just right, and the noise of a bear trying to get food from a bag would be enough to scare it off. That night, we all slept well, lulled by the creek's steady murmur and the chill mountain air. The second day was longer, with a steeper climb up the ridge and a stretch across rocky ledges that required careful footing. The views were worth every step: jagged peaks glowing gold as the sun dropped, pine forests stretching endlessly below us. We found a campsite near a small alpine lake, where the water was so clear we could see tiny fish darting under the surface. We set up our tents on a flat patch of dirt, surrounded by scattered boulders and a few scraggly bushes. That night was colder. We huddled around the fire for a while, talking quietly, then crawled into our tents earlier than the night before. We hung our bear bags in a nearby tree, and I double-checked to make sure everyone had put their scented items in the bags. The routine was almost second nature by then. Toothpaste, deodorant, snacks, all inside the bear bag. But it turned out we had missed something. I woke suddenly to a terrifying noise just after 2 a.m. A guttural, deep growl that rattled my bones. My tent was shaking slightly, and outside I could hear the unmistakable sound of heavy claws scratching against fabric and dirt. There was a loud thud, then a sharp cry from one of my friends, followed by frantic yelling. Adrenaline surged through me, and I scrambled out of my tent, heart pounding. The other 2 friends were already out, with flashlights shaking in their hands, beams cutting through the dark. The air smelled sharp and wild. Pine needles crushed underfoot, dirt kicked up, and something more primal. I saw the source of the chaos immediately. A massive black bear, at least 6 feet tall on all fours, its glossy black fur gleaming under our flashlights. The bear was on top of one of our tents, its powerful body pressing down, claws hooking into the fabric. The tent's poles creaked and bent alarmingly as the bear tried to get inside. My friend was yelling from inside the tent, struggling to get out, clearly terrified. Panic took hold, but there was no time to freeze. We grabbed whatever we could find: metal pans from the cooking gear, heavy rocks from the campsite, and began banging the pans together and throwing the rocks near the bear, hoping to scare it off. The bear growled and swatted at the tent with enormous paws, shaking it violently. My friend inside was still yelling, the sounds raw and desperate. The bear's focus wasn't on us directly. It was on the tent, on something inside. It kept clawing and biting at the fabric, trying to get at whatever was inside the tent with my friend. After a few tense minutes that felt like hours, the bear finally roared in frustration and backed off, retreating into the dark woods with heavy, crashing steps. We rushed to unzip the tent and pull my friend out. He was shaken but mostly unharmed. scratches on his arms and dirt smudged all over his face, but no serious injuries. His hands were trembling as he showed us the reason for the bear's attack. A nearly full tube of toothpaste left on his pillow inside the tent, emitting a strong minty smell. He had forgotten to put it in the bear bag. The realization hit us hard. The toothpaste had been enough to draw the bear's attention to the tent itself. An incredibly dangerous situation none of us had prepared for. Bears have an excellent sense of smell, far stronger than ours, and the smell of the toothpaste was irresistible to this hungry animal. We spent the rest of the night in tense silence, taking turns standing watch with makeshift weapons, listening to every rustle and snap of twigs around our camp. None of us slept. The bear never came back, but the fear lingered long after it disappeared. The next morning, we packed up quickly and made a plan to hike out earlier than scheduled. We talked quietly about what had happened, realizing how close we'd come to disaster. My friend who'd been attacked was visibly shaken but insisted he was fine, just relieved to be alive. None of us blamed him. Everyone makes mistakes, but the incident was a stark reminder of how careful you have to be in the wilderness. That trip changed how we approached backpacking from then on. Every single scented item, no matter how small, went into the bear bags without exception. We reinforced our campsite security, kept noise up at night, and made sure everyone knew the stakes. Looking back, the terror of that night, the sound of the bear's claws tearing at the tent, the weight of its massive body pressing down, still feels very real. It wasn't a story or a legend or something made up. It was a raw, pure moment of danger in the wilderness, where one small mistake could have meant the difference between life and death. We learned that bears don't just come for food. They come for anything that smells good. And when they do, they are strong, fast, and relentless. That night, we were lucky. No one got seriously hurt, but the lesson stayed with us, sharp as the mountain air. Respect the wild, respect the animals, and never take safety for granted.